Let's talk about Oslo. You open that chapter quoting Edward Said, who calls it a Palestinian Versailles. And it really, you, I think, make a very persuasive argument that it destroys the PLO as an effective resistance organization.
When I started this chapter, I really was starting it as and interested in it as a legal scholar. And I thought to myself, one of the offerings that I can make is to explain to a non-specialist, what did Oslo do in order to, permanently subjugate Palestinians? Because that's what it is. Oslo is a sovereignty trap. It doesn't promise. There's never even a mention of the Palestinian state. None of its negotiating terms promises an eventual outcome of a Palestinian state, right? Palestinians don't get anything. And so I wanted to explain that, how does Israel, create this new administration under Oslo to regulate access to water, access to land, access to movement? Like, how does Oslo set up, all of these strictures? But when I read the actual documents, the Declaration of Principles, also known as Oslo One, when you read Oslo Two, that sets up this jurisdictional regime of Area A, B, and C. When you read, Y and Taba and so on, it's so obvious how Palestinians are subjugated that I thought to myself, well, you don't need to be a legal expert to have this takeaway. You just need to be literate. So instead, I decided to answer a question I don't know the answer to yet, which is why? Why would the PLO enter into something so obviously devastating and self-defeating? And in trying to answer that question, what becomes, clearer to me anyway, is that this really is about salvaging the PLO. That's what was being done. The PLO, after its expulsion from Lebanon in 1982 and removal to Tunisia, is now no longer has a solid base where it almost, oversees, one would say the infrastructure of a para-state with, a significant refugee population within Lebanon that constitutes an entire, institution of representation and services and functioning, and also doesn't have the grounds for cross-border attacks. That's a significant blow. By 1987, they continue to weaken, not least because of the emergence of opposition like Hamas, that now becomes even more popular than the PLO struggle, as well as the fact that now there's an organic movement within the West Bank and Gaza that's leading an intifada, an uprising, so that the center of gravity shifts from the Palestinian diaspora to Palestinian lands themselves. And this is undermining the PLO's authority, together with the fact now, by the time Arafat, throws his hat in and supports, Saddam Hussein's occupation of Kuwait, which in retribution, right, Gulf states, Kuwait, number one, basically says Palestinians out. And now there's a whole loss of remittances to the Palestinians, as well as the fact that anybody that wants to support Palestine is going to support opposition and not the PLO itself. So all of these things come together to basically shape a moment where the PLO is at the edge of irrelevance, And entering into the negotiations, they had a very adept team at Madrid and Washington that saw the writing on the wall. Haidar Abdel Shafi, Raja Shahada are very clear in their legal analysis in warning that Israel is basically, offering the same thing that was offered in the 1978 Middle East peace process in the negotiation between Sadat and Begin, leading up to the 1979 permanent Egyptian-Israeli peace, which is an autonomy framework. That's all they're offering. They offered the same thing in 78. The only difference now when they're offering it in the lead up to the adoption of the Declaration of Principles is that they're saying that Palestinians will not only be able to govern themselves on these different plot of lands, but can also govern certain plots of land, but only there. They still won't have they still won't be able to exercise jurisdiction. And instead of electing a local government to do it, they'll allow the PLO to do it. Those are literally the only differences between 78 and what we ultimately see in 93. And even, I interviewed, one of the interesting things about doing this work, Chris, and this research is that the legal literature is dominated by Israeli scholars, especially on these questions. So part of the work that I was doing was also helping to create a Palestinian archive to advance these legal arguments. And doing that meant that I interviewed the interlocutors that were there. I interviewed the negotiators themselves. So Camille Mansour, who was there and was a negotiator and is a legal scholar, it's his words where he, illuminates that if you lose Palestinian representation, you've lost, we go back to being just no people anymore. We had to save the PLO in order to save our status as a juridical people. But in exchange for that recognition, we basically relinquished Palestine. The rescindment of the 1975 resolution declaring Zionism as a form of racism is emblematic. The amendment of the charter that says that Palestinians will no longer resort to armed force. When Israel is not making similar concessions, it doesn't say we're not resorting to armed force. The recognition of Israel. Palestinians recognize Israel. There's no mutual recognition of a Palestine. And so Palestinians basically cede and surrender what should have remained on the table as part of their negotiating leverage as a condition for entering into Oslo, which becomes the trap that they remained, frankly, ensconced within, although we obviously see many, many cracks, and Oslo has been dead, even though many have tried to keep it up on stilts. But that's what's happening. That's what people are celebrating in 1993, even though, Edward Said, Abdel Shafi, Shahade, and many others recognize as an instrument of defeat, this Palestine, it's done. Palestine has been lost.